Good morning. Welcome to our Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m. weekly Tanya Shir. We are studying still the first chapter of Tanya. We're actually nearing the end of the first chapter in Tanya. If you have a lessons in Tanya in front of you, I'm going to begin at the bottom of page 45 by the words Umimeno Bois. So the context here is that whereas the beginning of the Perek, the beginning of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe has dealt at great length with the discussion about really the discussion about the definition. What is actually a tzaddik? What is actually a beinoni? And therefore, by extension, really what is actually a rosha? We came to some sort of a conclusion. And we haven't exhausted the issue by any stretch of the imagination, but we've come to a clear enough conclusion pretty much at the beginning of Perek Alef, which the Alter Rebbe will stick to. The conclusion is that the definition of a rosha, as far as Tanya is concerned, as far as our discussion is concerned, is anybody with even one infraction, anybody with even one spiritual blemish, even a seemingly insignificant, well, I shouldn't say that, even with a seemingly common blemish, or even with a seemingly smaller type of blemish, right? Even if one violated something rabbinic, even if one violated nothing other than preventing others from violating, even if it's bittul Torah, which is very difficult to refrain from, etc., etc., nevertheless, one strike and you're out. That would be enough to consider a person a rasha. On the other hand, on the opposite extreme, the definition of a tzaddik is she'en lo yetzer hara. He doesn't have a yetzer hara. Note, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say that he doesn't have a nefesh ha-bahamis or a nefesh ha-chiyunis, because even a tzaddik does have a physical life and does have, physical hunger and physical tiredness, etc. The physical connection between body and soul, even by a tzaddik, is experienced in the context of something called nefesh ha-chiyunis or nefesh ha-tivis, a more natural type soul. But definitely the tzaddik doesn't have a yetzer hara, which means that yes, the tzaddik feels hunger, but his hunger is only to serve Hashem. Or tzaddik feels tired, but it's only for the sake of fulfilling his mission in this world, etc. In between, you have a beinoni which is again nishtahinu nishtaher. So he's not a rasha, which means there are no infractions. He's perfect. Again, later Alter Rebbe will explain. We'll develop this idea, but he's perfect in thought, speech, and action, which means he doesn't willingly sin in anything that he has direct control over. But you also wouldn't put him in the category of a tzaddik who doesn't have a yetzer hara, which means that he wants to sin, but he controls himself. So the beinoni becomes the to use a Weltish expression, the beinoni becomes the icon of the white knuckler. To white knuckle it's an expression, right? When you hold yourself, when a person refrains from doing something that they want to do, in a physical display of this internal struggle, they will often clench their fist, right? In other words, to show that they're fighting with themselves, and they're kind of the energy that goes into the clenching of the fist reflects the self-control involved. Now, what happens when you clench your fist for a long time is that your knuckles turn white from the stretch. So the English expression, when you say a person is white-knuckling something, it means they really want to, right? They really want to get angry. They really want to, they really want to. It's used very often in the addiction world. A person, really wants to engage in their addiction, whatever it is, alcohol, God knows what, but they're holding themselves back. They're white-knuckling it. So the beinoni is the ultimate white-knuckler, because they're kind of in that zone right there. They're in that zone where they're tempted. The beinoni has a yetzer hara. He wants. He's really tempted. He's really tempted. There's a soul that is tempted by evil, and yet somehow, amazingly, the beinoni constantly controls himself. Now you can already, as you think about this, you can already see here that on the one hand, superficially, we're talking about a class B, a grade B level of service of Hashem, as in a comparison to a tzaddik who would be grade A. The tzaddik doesn't even want. The tzaddik doesn't even have temptation. The tzaddik doesn't even, want to talk lashon hara or say something deceitful or, etc. Whereas the beinoni really does want. So in that sense, he's obviously significantly inferior to the tzaddik. On the other hand, the tzaddik never quite has that battle that the Beinoni has. Because the Beinoni, although he wants it, the Beinoni doesn't give in. The Beinoni controls himself. So this is going to become an incredibly important idea where there is, in a ruchnis, in a certain sense of avodas Hashem, we're going to have to reframe our sense of success and accomplishment. And the Beinoni, perhaps, the argument will be made that the Beinoni who controls himself, who fights with his nature, possesses a certain quality in avodas Hashem, perhaps that even the tzaddik doesn't have. Because again, the tzaddik isn't tempted. So whereas, of course, on the one hand, we should all be very envious of the tzaddik. He isn't even, he has a gashmaka shtickle lashon hara, like a juicy, saturating, just delicious piece of yetzer hara. Delectable is the word I'm looking for. Piece of lashon that he wants to share with everybody. The tzaddik isn't even tempted. Tzaddik finds no joy, no pleasure, no guilty enjoyment at all in sharing this. Nothing. The Beinoni is like the guy who says, listen, I don't repeat lashon hara, so listen carefully the first time. No, I'm kidding. The Beinoni is the person who does see the temptation, does have that yetzer hara, that inclination that would enjoy it. The Rasha gives in, right? The Rasha tells the lashon hara. The Beinoni won't do it. The Beinoni won't do it. So they have something to say, but mahaltas and boch, they keep it in their stomach. They don't release it. And in that sense, from that sense, in an avodas Hashem quality sense, the Beinoni is superior, which is one of the reasons why the Alter Rebbe dedicates the sefer to the Beinoni, because of the struggle. Another way people sometimes refer to the Sefer Tanya as the Sefer of the struggle, of the Sefer of the struggling Jew, which while sounds a little commercialized, there's a lot of truth to it. Okay, it's not as simple as I'm making it out now, because later Alter will say there's actually different levels in Beinoni, and even a Beinoni, at the time that he davens, at the time of davening, the Beinoni does get real relief from the struggle, because the Beinoni can elevate himself to a level where he's no longer tempted during davening. And then there's such a thing as a Beinoni hamispalel kol hayoim, which means the Beinoni is such a thing as a Beinoni is on the level of somebody who davens all day. But again, that's for further down the line. This is really the first half. That's the summary of the first half of Perek Alef of Tanya. After that, the Alter Rebbe moves really into the meat, into the meat and potatoes, the real hardcore toichen content of really the first revolutionary idea of Sefer Tanya. And that is the concept, we started learning it last week, I think, or the week before, I don't remember. Yeah, last week. That every Yid, every Jew has two souls. Based on the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, of course, who recorded Kisvei HaArizal, the L'cholish Yisrael, L'chotzadik, V'echad Rosha, Yishtei Neshamas, every Jew has two. We're not going to discuss the second soul. The second one, the Nefesh HaShenis, is discussed in Perek Beis. We'll get to that not this week, Imretz Hashem. But the first one, the first soul that's discussed, is what we call the Nefesh Abamis, or what the Alter Rebbe refers to as the Nefesh Achas, Mitzad HaKlipa V'Sitra Achra. Okay. So this is, of course, possessed by, this of course, it exists within every one of us by nature. I mentioned last week, I believe the reason why the Alter Rebbe teaches this one first is not just because this is more natural to us, but because this actually, on the timeline, this actually comes first. The Nefesh Elikis doesn't really enter a person properly until the age of Bar or Bas Mitzvah. And this one, it seems, doesn't need a lot of explanation. We're all keenly familiar with it. This is the Nefesh Abamis, right? The Nefesh Abamis darf nicht zu viel Masber sein. Doesn't need a lot of explanation. It's the default setting. It's the default setting. The Nefesh Abamis, it's when a child first comes into consciousness. The first thing that the child is aware of is their hunger, their exhaustion. They're feeling comfortable, they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling pleasure, they're feeling pain, things of this nature on a purely physical level. This, again, as a rule, is all associated with the Nefesh Abamis. Okay. The Alter Rebbe doesn't explain much other than the fact that this is Ki Adam Hu HaNefesh, Ki Adam Nefesh Abamis. This is responsible for the physical life of a person. and immediately goes into the emotional ramifications of this nefesh habahamis. Umimena boys, I'm going to read a little bit inside. Umimena, from this nefesh habahamis, from this first soul, emanate. Kol amidas rois, me'arba yasoidus roim sheba. So the nefesh habahamis has 4 elements, because everything Hashem made in this world has 4 elements. And each one of these are not physical elements, these are spiritual elements. Every one of these elements produces midos, produces emotions or character traits. The hainu kas v'gaiva, every person by nature is prone to some degree to kas. Kas is anger, gaiva is arrogance. Misoido esh, this comes from the element of fire, shenigba l'maylo, that always strives, that always rises up, like the anger of a person that is hot, like the arrogance of a person that rises up. So the kas and the gaiva come from the yesod ha'esh shebenefesh habahamis. Taivas hatanugim, materialism, all sorts of lusts, the pursuit of pleasures, the enjoyment of pleasure for the sake of pleasure itself. Misoid hamayim, this comes from the element of water of the nefesh habahamis. Ki hamayim atzmichim kol minei tainug, water makes things grow. Water is responsible for growth of all minei tainug, all sorts of delicacies. Every lusting of a human being, every physical pleasure of a human being is associated with lachluchis, with moisture, with water. So this would be responsible for, this is all responsible, this can all be credited or to the element of water in the nefesh habahamis. V'hoilelus, frivolity, v'leitzonus, scoffing, v'hispirus, boasting, dvarim b'teilim, empty words. Misoid haruach, this comes from the element, from the yesod of ruach, of air. This is the emptiness that people so often engage in, wasting time in stuff that has no toichen, right? That has no significance. V'atzvus, depression and laziness. These come yesod offer from the element of earth that weighs the person down. So the nefesh habahamis has these 4 parts, and all of them are responsible for midos rois. The Alter Rebbe says midos rois, evil character traits. Again, if we were talking in the context of a tzaddik doesn't have any element of evil. There's no yetzer hara, so it would be just the nefesh hachiyunis, the nefesh hativis. Obviously, the tzaddik wouldn't have any temptation toward anger and arrogance and all the rest of it. It would just be that part of the nefesh hativis that gives the tzaddik physical life. That's it. But for the rest of us who have not eradicated the negativity element of the nefesh hachiyunis, we also have a nefesh habahamis or a yetzer hara. So we struggle to one degree or another with all of these character traits. And of course, Chassidus says very famously that just like everything in this physical world that Hashem created has a different composition when it comes to these 4 elements. Some physical things have more fire, some have more air, some have more water, some have more earth. So it is with people's characters and personality. Some are more prone to anger, some are prone to arrogance, some are prone to lusting, some are prone to frivolity, to emptiness, some are prone to depression or laziness. So there are many, many different, right? Some of us are blessed where we're prone to more than one challenge, etc. But this is, for many of us, this is the struggle of the lifetime. I'm reminded, just really as a side note, I'm reminded of a beautiful Hasidic story about a Yid who comes to the Kotzker Rebbe. If I mentioned this in these shiurim before, I'm sorry. It's a Hasidic story that I like very much. He comes to the Kotzker Rebbe and he goes, Rebbe, I have so many problems, so many challenges. And he gives the Rebbe, brings a list, he brings a kvittel. A kvittel means a note. That means when you come into Yechidus private audience by a tzaddik, before you come in, you write down what it is that you want beforehand. You hand in the paper. So he comes into the Kotzker Rebbe, he writes a shopping list of all of his problems. He doesn't get along with this one, doesn't get along with that one, he needs a bracha for this, for that, his family, his children, his parnasa, the people he sits next to in shul, this, whatever. He's got a whole shopping list of issues. So the Kotzker Rebbe was, in this particular case, I guess, was intrigued or picked up on the fact that whereas most people come in with a couple of issues, this guy came in with like, a really long list. So the Kotzker Rebbe read the long list, and in his inimitable style, the Kotzker Rebbe said to him, I don't think you really have such a long list of problems. He said to him, I think you really only have one problem. Really? Rebbe, what's... I'm telling you about all my life struggles, right? I can't be insensitive. Don't, you got to validate me. What's my one problem? The Kotzker Rebbe said, I think your problem is you have too much free time. You're not busy enough. If you were busy enough, then you wouldn't have so much free. When the mind isn't filled with teichen, when the mind isn't filled with real content, then you start imagining also, or not imagining, you start being bothered, by all sorts of other things. Kotzker Rebbe said, I have a feeling if you get busy doing something positive and productive, and you throw yourself into that, then maybe some of these other things on your list will bother you a lot less. Or maybe you'll notice that they're not even problems in the first place. It's a very insightful story, because every person by nature is made, we're all designed by the Eibishter, until the coming of Mashiach, we're all designed to battle. We're designed with the ability to break through barriers and to we're designed by the Eibishter to battle in one form or another. Sometimes in the pursuit of providing for ourselves an easier time in life, we do ourselves a disservice, because what we do is we expose ourselves, we allow ourselves to being bothered, to being thrown off by all sorts of other things that are petty in comparison to the battle we really should be battling. Battle within ourselves, battle within the darkness, within the world around us, etc. Right? So sometimes when a person is bothered by all sorts of things, what the real issue is that they have too much free time. And if they were to truly dedicate and throw themselves into their shlichus, then a lot of these other things would fall, even push it from a human perspective. Not just definitely from a spiritual perspective too. So I'm saying this because Alter Rebbe says, one of the temptations, one of the elements of the Nefesh Habamis is ruach. Ruach means air, nothing. Pustkeit, just things of no substance. For some of us, this is a tremendous challenge. Wasting time, wasting opportunities. We could be operating on a so much deeper and more profound level, and we, for whatever reason, we give ourselves we allow ourselves to waste significant parts of our lives. And I can tell you, as someone who sat with people in the last days or hours of their life, when people look back at their lives, may Hashem protect us, it's usually one of the biggest regrets. I wasted time. I was too consumed with pettiness, right? I was worried what this one would think about me and that one would think about me, and I held myself back from doing things that I knew was right, that I should have done, that I wanted to do, because I was held back by this, that, and the other. And I look back now and it's push it, shtuyot, push it, nonsense. And the regret can be painful, looking back on one's life. I'm saying this because this is not necessarily an easy battle for many of us, but it's a very important one, because just like the Nefesh Habamis, Alter Rebbe is saying, just like the Nefesh Habamis will tempt a person with anger or with arrogance. Everybody can understand these are significant temptations, or laziness or depression. Some people have tremendous struggle with this, right? Or different types of lusting, pursuing temptations. So as much as the Nefesh Habamis does all of that, the Nefesh Habamis also has this concept of ruach, which is that there is this tendency, there is this attraction, quite to its own detriment of the Nefesh Habamis, to schlep us into ruach. Into ruach in this case means puskheit, emptiness, stuff that has no value, here today, gone tomorrow. We get swept up in it. We can get all excited, and then I'm reminded of the guy who once came, of the story they tell of a person who came to the Rebbe and told the Rebbe he struggles with arrogance. Yes, he finds himself to be a very just stuck-up person. Rebbe, help me to get rid of my ego. And the story, the way I heard it, was the Rebbe said to him, can I ask you a question? What is it that you're even so arrogant about? What have you accomplished in your life that you're even so arrogant about? Have you studied a lot of Torah? Have you, given a lot of money to tzedakah? Have you made a significant impact on the world? Have you accomplished anything significant that you'd be arrogant about? That was the Rebbe's answer to him. And of course, in doing so, the Rebbe's helping him deal with his arrogance. But I think more significantly than that, the Rebbe's kind of like turning his head a bit. And the Rebbe's saying, you think this is an arrogance issue, and maybe it is a bit, but maybe what it really is, maybe there's more ruach here than eish. Maybe there's more, there's a difference between hisparus and gava. They're both expressions of arrogance. They're both expressions of, inflating oneself. But gaiva at least has substance. Gaiva is a person who's talented, a person who's worked hard, a person lomada to Torah harbe, right? An expression of the Mishnah. A person who's truly accomplished. They've studied 1,000 blat of Gemara. They've studied them 1,000 times. They have tremendous insights. They've given shiurim. They've inspired people. They've taught students. They've made us a real contribution. They work hard. All right. The Torah tells us, even so, don't take the credit for yourself. Don't become arrogant, etc. The nefesh habamis will still tempt you with gaiva. That's eish. But then there's a person who they're just excited, like a child. They're just excited about themselves because they think they could, because they are. But there's no real significance to it. It's a hot air balloon. That's a spirus. That's different. That comes from Yesod HaRuach. And by the way, the difference between the two of them is Be'ein HaRuach. It's infinite. Sometimes you'll hear people tell you, I struggle with arrogance. I'm very arrogant. Nonsense. You're not arrogant. You're just inflated with hot air. And that's not even real arrogance. Not that real arrogance is okay. Of course it's not. But it's important to understand the difference between the two. All right. But the point for now is that all of these midas come from the nefesh habamis. The Gam, the Alter Rebbe throws in a curveball here. The Gam midas toivos shebeteva kol Yisrael betoldoisam. When it comes to a yid, the nefesh habamis has a surprise for us. It doesn't just give us all of these negative character traits, but there are also certain midos toivos. There are also certain good character traits, good midos, that are as natural to a yid, that are natural to a yid by virtue of his nefesh habamis. Kamoy Alter Rebbe says, for example, Rachmanis, Jews are by nature Rachmanim, merciful, Ugemilas chasadim, and kindness. A yid also has by nature mercy and kindness that comes from his nefesh habamis. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't come from the nefesh elikis. The nefesh elikis also produces, of course, Rachmanis and Gemilas chasadim, but it's different. By the nefesh elikis, the person has to battle to reveal his nefesh elikis. By the nefesh habamis, there's no battle involved. You don't have to be nobody has to battle to reveal the nefesh habamis. The nefesh habamis is the nefesh achas. It's the first one. It's the default setting. Says the Alter Rebbe, the nefesh habamis of a yid will also produce midas toivos. How? Why? Ki b'Yisrael nefesh is the klipa im klipas noiga sheyesh bo gam kin toiv mihi misoid eitz hadas toivara. Because by a yid, when we say that this nefesh achas comes from klipa, as we'll learn later at great length in the 6th and 7th chapter of Tanya, there's also different types of klipa. There's something called shalish klipas atmeis, which is completely evil, and there's something called klipas noiga. Noiga means to shine. There's this concept called klipas noiga, which is it's klipa, it's negativity, but it possesses within itself, it contains radiance of goodness, radiance of godliness. The radiance of godliness is generally concealed and covered, but it's still there. Kabbalistically, this comes from the Eitz Hadas, which was, the pasuk says, Eitz Hadas Toivra, which is some kind of combination, right, between good and evil. We know Kabbalah explains very famously that once Adam Rishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, what he did was he took this fusion, this mixture that was in the Eitz Hadas, where Toiv and Ra were intertwined, and he spread that intertwinement throughout all of existence. Until that point, basically, other than in the Eitz Hadas itself, Tov was Tov, Ra was Ra, and the two were separate. And the Chet Eitz Hadas, by injecting within himself from the Eitz Hadas, he took this Eitz Hadas itself was the only place where Tov and Ra were mixed, and he took that, he ingested that within himself, and from there the mixture, the intertwinement of Tov and Ra spread everywhere. Until Mashiach comes, Ein Tov b'loi Ra, vein Ra b'loi Tov. In this world there's no good without bad, and there's no bad without good, which makes for a very confusing and very world in which we live. But essentially, inherently, this is the concept of Klipas Noiga. So Alter Rebbe says, since the Nefesh Habamis of a Yid comes inherently from Klipas Noiga, we would be dishonest if we would describe it as being purely evil. The Nefesh Habamis of a Yid also has Toiv, it also has good. What's good? Rachmanas and good midas. Rachmanas and Gemilas Chasadim. Alter Rebbe doesn't say which Yesod does it come from. Does it come from Eish? Does it come from Ruach? Does it come from Mayim? Right? Gemilas Chasadim maybe Mayim. Rachmanas maybe, I don't know. But be it as it may, they come also from the same Nefesh Habamis that gives us all these negative character traits, also produces Rachmanas and Gemilas Chasadim, which are as natural to the Jews as their negative character traits. All right, this is what's written here. Before we go on, I just want to add something. The Gemara says that Jews by nature have three character traits. By Shonim, they are bashful, they are shy. They are Rachmanim, they are merciful. Gem lechasodim, they are kind. The Alter Rebbe here only quotes two out of the three, Rachmanim and Gem lechasodim, which means they're merciful and they're kind, they're generous. What happened to Baishanim? What happened to being bashful? The Alter Rebbe omits that. There's some discussion about that. Why would the Alter Rebbe, in other words, if the Gemara is describing character traits of the Jews as being these three, Baishanim, merciful, kind, benevolent, generous, and Baishanim and sort of timid, Baishanim timid, shy, timid is a good translation. Then why would the Alter Rebbe omit that? So there's an explanation over here that's printed in the back of some of the Tanyas with explanation. It's a very interesting explanation. They bring down that there's a difference. When we say Jews are Rachmanim and Goim Lechasodim, we mean that by birth. By birth, Jews are merciful and kind. But when we say Jews are Baishanim, Jews are timid, that's not by birth. In fact, the Gemara itself says in Masechta Beitza that Jews are Azim Shebu'um, the Jewish people are Azim Shebu'umis, which means they're the toughest and the strongest and the most aggressive of all the nations. Right? We have the chutzpah. We have the chutzpah to survive despite the world's repeated attempts to annihilate us over and over again. We're Azim Shebu'umis. And yet, on the other hand, we say we're Baishanim. Baishanim means we're timid. So which one is it? So one of the ways of explaining it is that one is before Matan Torah and the other is after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, we were Azin Sheba Umois. We possessed this character trait of being defiant. After Matan Torah, because of the Torah that we learn, Torah weakens a person. So this introduces this element of being Baishanim. It introduces an element of timidness. This is the explanation that's given. So because the Alter Rebbe here is talking about midas tovas shebeteva kol yisol betoldoisam, those midas those good midas that are true to a Jew by birth, by very virtue of them being born a Jew. Therefore, he omits the timidness because the timidness doesn't come by birth. The timidness comes from Torah. This is the way it's explained, and it's just an incredibly brilliant explanation and why the Alter Rebbe omits one out of the three. The wisdom of it, the application of it, goes even deeper. Because what we're really saying is that when you tell a Jew you're a Rachman, you're a merciful Jew by nature, when we tell a Jew you're a kind Jew, you're a kind person by nature, we mean through and through, all the way till the end. You're merciful and kind till the end. When we tell a Jew that you're a Baishan, that you're timid, that's not through and through. It means the Torah learning that you learn introduces an element of timidness to you. But by virtue of your birth, you're not timid at all. You're azin, you're defiant. It's incredibly important because sometimes people misunderstand this idea. Oh, Jews are by nature timid, Jews are by nature merciful, Jews are by nature kind. That sometimes can be translated to Jews are by nature weak. And the world sometimes perceives us this way, and we sometimes perceive ourselves this way. And weakness, listen to me very carefully, please. Weakness is never a positive character trait, ever. The Eibishter didn't create a Yid to be weak, under no circumstance. Weakness is ruach. Weakness is an evil character trait. There's nothing in kedusha, there's nothing in toiv that's weak, ever. Now, we can talk about the definition of strength, right? That strength has to be authentic, and the strength has to be something that is true to a person's nature, right? It's like the Rebbe once wrote, for a tzoymeach, for a plant to be strong, it has to stay rooted to the ground. For an animal to be strong, it has to walk around, right? So which one is it? The answer is strength is defined differently in different contexts. But the Eibishter made, that's why we're saying that the Yidden, before Matan Torah, were Azin Sheba Umash. They were not just strong, they were the most aggressive of all the nations. Now, when you study Torah, that needs to be tempered. That needs to be, the Torah gives us the ability to work with that, where to apply it, where not, and how to understand it. But at no point should this, by Shonim, Rachmonim, and Goim Lechasodim, which is a positive character trait of a Yid, at no point should it be understood in the context of weakness. Okay, I'm going to tell you an amazing story, but first I want to finish the Perek. Masha'en Kain, the Alter Rebbe concludes Perek Alef with what is considered, interestingly enough, to be a couple of controversial lines. But anyways, here it is. I mean, if they're explained correctly, they're not they shouldn't be seen as controversial at all. But you know how it works. Masha'en Kain nefashos umas ha'olam. When we talk about the souls of Umas Ha'olam, of the nations of the world, Hein mishar klipas tmeyes she'en ben toiv klal. So what the Alter saying is like this. First of all, a guy obviously doesn't have a nefesh elokis, right? A Yid, we say, has two. L'cholish Yisrael yesh shtei neshamas. A Yid has two neshamas. A guy only has one. A guy only has the nefesh abamis, the nefesh achyonis, etc. That's difference number one. Difference number two, even this nefesh abamis is different between a Yid and a Goy because of what we just explained. By a Yid, the nefesh abamis comes from klipas noiga. Klipas noiga is toiv hara, is a mixture. By the way, there's a lot in Chassidus about this concept of the mixture, the idea that there's no toiv without ra, there's no ra without toiv. It's not for now. We'll learn in Mitzvah Shem at great length when we learn about klipas noiga, the significance. What does this mean? The mixture of good and bad. What does that even mean? Needs to be explored, but not for now. But the nefesh abamis of Yid comes from klipas noiga. Masha'enken says the Alter Rebbe, which is not the case regarding the nefesh abamis of a goy, doesn't come from klipas noiga. It comes from what we'll call later shalish klipas atmeis. Mishar klipas meshem and toiv klal. There's no good at all. We wouldn't say by a goy that his nefesh, his or her nefesh abamis, that betoldoisam they're rachmonim and goyim lechasodim. Not true. We wouldn't say that. As is brought down in Eitz Chaim in Kisvei Harizal. V'chol tivu da'avdin ho. Must we find sometimes goyim do wonderful things. They do very good things. Says the Gemara, Lagarmayu avdin, there's always an underlying selfish motive. Kedisa b'Gemara al posuk v'chesed lo mimchatos, as the Gemara explains in the posuk, v'chesed lo mimchatos, that the kindness of a goy is a chatos, is a sin, is an aveira. She called stock of a chesed shumas ha'olam oisin. That whenever the umas ha'olam do some type of stock of a chesed, some type of charity and kindness, shumas ha'olam oisin einin ela l'isyair. It's chulu. It's always for some type of self glorification, right? It is not possible. In Kabbalah, it's explained for a goy to ever do anything selfless or completely, truly selflessly. Not possible, because he only has one nefesh, which is the nefesh abamis, and even that nefesh abamis comes from shalish klipas atmeis, not even klipas noigas. So there's no actual kedusha, there's no actual godliness in there. It's just simply klipa. Ubemela, no matter what the yid is going to do, no matter what the guy is going to do, there's always going to be selfish motives, and there's always going to be some type of self-glorification agenda, etc., etc. All right. Again, I don't want to make, I don't want to get hysterical when people study this. Sometimes people have a very hard time. It's, how could you say such a thing? Chesed lo memchatos. Tutzach, and it turns out, right, that it's a Gemara, the Alter Rebbe didn't make it up, etc. The Rebbe adds very famously, that the Alter Rebbe is not talking about something called Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, right? You have Goyim who saved, who did tremendously kind and wonderful things. Many of them sometimes with tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. Many of them, in many cases, saving hundreds, thousands of Jews, right, from the Holocaust. May Hashem protect us. All sorts of things. So these are called Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. Chasidei Umas Ha'olam is Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. The Gemara says Yesh Lam Chelek Le'olam Haba. They're benevolent, not out of selfish motives, but a genuine concern for their fellow, etc., etc. The reason why these lines of Tanya, in my very humble opinion, are not offensive to anyone, and should not be seen as offensive to anyone, and I don't even think they're controversial at all, although I get that they could be seen that way, is because what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here, we translate Klippa as evil. We translate Klippa as dark, as negative, as bad. It's actually not correct. The definition of Klippa, which the Alter Rebbe will explain very clearly later on, is actually anything not godly. Anything not divine is described in the works of Kabbalah as Klippa. So when we say that a goy is his nefesh abahamis comes mishalish klippas hatmeis, v'rois legamre, right? Translate the words chaptatzita, you get a shock. Three klippa, three forces of evil, hatmeis, which are impure and completely evil. Yeah. But we're not saying that every guy is a murderer, We're not saying that every guy is a thief. It's not even what we're talking about. In this context, you see, because we have to learn a little bit of Chassidus. In this context, when we talk about Klippa and Ra, we don't mean evil in the sense the way the world translates evil. We're talking about anything which is not godly. When the Alter Rebbe says that a goy's nefesh abamis comes from shalosh klippas atmeis rois legamre, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that a goy is human. That's all. That a goy is a human being. A doimim is a doimim, a rock is a rock, a tzemeach is a tzemeach, a flower is a flower, a chai is a chai, a bullfrog is a bullfrog, and a cow is a cow, an alligator is an alligator, and a medaber is a human being. That's what we're saying. A medaber is a human being. Now, can a human being completely go out of the limitations of being a human being? No, can't. Just like a frog cannot become a person, right? Unless it's a fairy tale. And just like a flower can't become a cow, and just like a rock can't become a flower, a human being, by virtue of being a human being, a regular human being, so to speak, cannot become godly. The Eibishter created them all. Finished. In that context, we would call the goy one who is associated with sholosh klippas hatmeis v'rois legamre, not because it's evil in the sense where we expect the guy to hurt us and do all sorts of things. By the way, not if we're having this conversation honestly, not that we haven't learned from Jewish history, unfortunately, how the most cultured and the most wonderful and the most sophisticated and elegant goyim have turned into the most thirsty and vicious and blood-sucking anti-Semites the world has ever seen, right? But even putting that issue aside, genuinely good-natured, cultured, genuinely good people goyim are human. That's all the Alter Rebbe is saying. They're human. By virtue of being human, a human being has certain limitations. One of the limitations of a human being is that they're not capable of going out of their own limitations, because nothing that Hashem created in this world which is limited can go out of its own limitations. It's a contradiction in terms. What are some of the limitations of human beings? Well, one of the limitations of human beings is that a human being is hardwired to act within his or her own best interest. That's all. It's not even a chasaron. It's not a deficiency on the part of a human being. And by the way, I should throw this in. The Rebbe once explained that it doesn't even mean that a guy can't have Mesiras Nefesh, because It's factually not true. Goyim do have Mesiras Nefesh for the sake of their religion, for the sake of their country, for the sake of whatever the case may be. They're prepared to risk their lives. Sometimes, Rachmana litzlan, even terrorists will blow themselves up. But that's obviously very dark. But even for the sake of their country, for the sake of morals and ideals, the Rebbe says there's very high level, if you will, human concept of Mesiras Nefesh. And again, there's an explanation for it. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe says, that's because a human being has seichel. And seichel, the mind of a human being can calculate that sometimes it's worth it. There is value, there's, whatever the cheshbon may be, a human being can get to a point where they calculate that certain things are worth risking or sacrificing their life for. But a human being cannot do something, which is, again, this is the way the Eibishter made human beings. A human being cannot do something in which there's no toyelis, in which there's no benefit for themselves. We are inherently selfish. It's not a positive character trait, but it's not a dark character trait. In the human sense, it can be used to accomplish tremendous things. What it is not godly, because it's human. And and being human is not being godly. The chidush here, the novelty, is the other way around. The novelty is what the Alter Rebbe says on the other side, that the nefesh ha'ba'amis of a yid, even though it comes from klipa, it comes from klipas noiga. Klipas noiga doesn't just mean there's some good in it. Klipas noiga means there's some godliness in it. That's the takeaway from the end of the Perek. That means when it comes to talking about a yid, even when you talk about the nefesh ha'ba'amis of a yid, we're talking about an nefesh ha'ba'amis that has kedusha, that has a lakus in it. That's the point here. You have to have derech eretz, respect for the nefesh ha'ba'amis of a yid. How can you say such a thing? The nefesh ha'ba'amis of a yid is responsible for all of these negative character traits that we're talking about over here. Anger and lusting and arrogance and frivolity and laziness and depression. May Hashem protect us from them all. Yes, says the Alter Rebbe, it's klipa, but it's klipas noiga. Klipas noiga means there's a little bit of a lakus, there's a little bit of godliness hidden within there. Scratch the surface, or you don't even have to scratch the surface of the nefesh ha'ba'amis of a yid as to gefin and lakus. You'll find godliness. What is the definition of godliness? Well, the first definition of godliness is that it defies humanity. A yid doesn't have that limitation. This I'm elaborating on this because this is an issue that was very close to the Rebbe's heart. Because when it comes to the issue of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, which the Rebbe really campaigned, there's the halacha that the Jew has to be poil, the Jew has to influence the goy to keep Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. The Rambam writes this, that Jews are obligated to influence goyim. So the Rebbe says, why does it have to be through a yid? Why does the yid have to be the one to influence the goy to do it? Why can't the goy? Many of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, by the way, are very simple, straightforward, rules and laws of healthy society. Says the Rebbe, because if the goy does it on their own, then it's just human. But if the yid is poiled this on the goy, then there's a godly element involved, even if it's coming from a place in the yid called the nefesh ha'ba'amis or whatever the case may be. Even there's a godly element to it. In other words, the elokus, the godliness that has saturated the existence of a yid, is not restricted to the realm of the nefesh elokis. It comes down, says the Alter Rebbe, it comes down even into his nefesh ha'ba'amis. You know what the takeaway from this is? I'm telling you, my story, we'll call it a day. The takeaway from this is, sometimes we think we want to connect ourselves to Hashem, right? We want to connect ourselves. We want to elevate ourselves. We think we have to go somewhere else. I have to divest myself of my nature. I have to divest myself of my nefesh ha'ba'amis, because my nefesh ha'ba'amis is ra. Says Chassidus, it is ra, but it's not only ra. Right? Remember that famous answer of the Rebbe? You're looking for a lakus, you're looking for godliness. Look inside yourself, not just in your nefesh elokis, in your nefesh ha'ba'amis also. There's godliness there too. All right, this is the conclusion of Perek Alef of Tanya. I want to just conclude with the story. Legend has it that there was once a Hasidic Farbrengen where a Mendel Futefas, may Hashem bless his soul, was present, and somebody said something very offensive, said something very rude to Reb Mendel. And Reb Mendel didn't get offended. He didn't get defensive, he didn't get, in Yiddish it's called, he didn't get sakratzt, he didn't get flustered. But the Farbrengen moved on, and ended, eventually everybody goes home. Somebody follows Reb Mendel and said, Reb Mendel, I have to ask you how you were able to do that. He said, and I noticed you didn't just not respond. You know, sometimes a person will get angry, but they'll white knuckle it, they'll contain themselves. You taka didn't get flustered. He said, I don't understand what the person said to you was so rude and so disgusting. How did you not get, how did that not wrinkle you? How did that not cause a curl in the water? Nothing. A ruffle? Nothing. So Reb Mendel said, they spoke in Yiddish, of course, Reb Mendel said, V'alechzog krish mashalamita, because I say krish mashalamita. He said, Reb Mendel, everybody says krish mashalamita. Well, how does that help? He says, no. When I say krish mashalamita, I make a cheshbon nefesh. And I know myself, I do a self-reckoning, and I know myself very well. When somebody hurls an accusation or an offensive comment at me, I'll know immediately if what the person is saying is true or not true. And either way, I'm not offended. If it's true, I'm not offended because I know it's true. I'm very aware of it. I may already be working on it to fix it. Or I may have decided that the time has not come yet for other calculated reasons. But I'm keenly aware. I've taken a walk in that dark alley and I know every nook and cranny of it. If what the person is saying is not true, I'm not offended because I know myself and I know it's not true. He said the reason why people get offended is because they're not sure. And somewhere deeper within themselves, they're afraid to face it if it is true. They're resentful to themselves for not having the courage to face it if it is true. They're not sure. Maybe it's not true. And that insecurity, that lack of internal clarity is where gives birth to being offended and getting angry. Instead of doing the internal work, what we do is we turn around to the person who've offended us and we offend them back, right? As a very weak, of course, form of self-defense. But the Mendel said, Chassidus taught us, in Lubavitch, he said, we learned that you make a cheshbon nefesh means you're honest with yourself on the inside. And then you're never offended when an accusation is, sometimes you have to protect yourself, but you never get lost, you never get hurt and offended. When somebody hurls an accusation at you, your defenses are ironclad. It's either true, I know myself well enough to know it's either true or not true. I'm saying this because the Yesod HaRuach of the Nefesh HaBahamis loves to create chaos and confusion and a sense of being lost. This is a terrible, terrible character trait, the one that needs to be fought with strength and with clarity and with a sense of purpose. And even to the Nefesh HaBahamis, we can say to the Nefesh HaBahamis, you think you're kulei ra, you think you're all evil, it's not true. By virtue of being the Nefesh HaBahamis of a Yid, you have midas toivos, positive character traits, by virtue of the godliness that is within you.